Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the precarious reality for Syrian refugees in Turkey.
Riots against Syrian immigrants living in the country have spread to several cities now, with shops and buildings set on fire.
What a wave of anti-refugee violence in Turkey and the response to it in Syria reveal about the status of millions of displaced Syrians. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
There was this video leaked through social media. That video was showing a Syrian young man allegedly sexually harassing a Syrian girl who was around 6 years old. And that girl is said to be this young man's cousin.
Sinem Köseoğlu is an Al Jazeera correspondent based in Istanbul. She's been covering the spate of violent attacks against Syrian refugees that were happening all across Turkey last week. It all started with this video.
This video was leaked and in the central city of Kayseri. Kayseri is a conservative and nationalist city, by the way, but the number of the Syrian refugees living in the city is not that high compared to the other places. There are at least 80,000 Syrians living in that city. So when the video was seen by people took to the streets and they started chanting that they don't want any Syrian refugees in their country. And some MPs, especially from the Nationalist Party, were on the ground as well. The governor was on the ground, the city's police director was on the ground, and people were so angry. They were cursing the Syrian refugees, and they said they are fed up and they don't want any of those kinds of abuse scenes to be seen. And they started to attack the properties of the Syrian refugees in Kayseri, their shops, their cars. But when I spoke to some politicians of the city who are members in the parliament, they were suspecting a kind of provocation and organized incident because some machines were used to harm the, for instance, cars, automobiles of the Syrian refugees. Of course, that wasn't the first time an anti-refugee sentiment protest was in place in Turkey. But when I'm talking about the case, the people who took to the streets were complaining to the officials that why are we waiting? Why are not we sending them back to their home? Do we have to wait until our people are abused or harassed?
So as you mentioned, initially this was contained to one town, Kayseri, but things quickly escalated and these attacks and protests started spreading across the country. What does that look like? What kind of violence have we seen?
Yes, the night after, the protests spread to other cities, including Gaziantep and Hatay and Şanlıurfa. These three are the border cities in southeast Turkey, southern Turkey, and also in some districts of Istanbul, where you have many Syrian refugees living.
In the southern province of Hatay, protesters burned a Syrian grocery store.
When you look at the videos circulating on social media, people are chanting, they are using nationalist slogans, and they're asking that Syrian refugees should be sent back to their homes. It was scary. I spoke to some of my Syrian friends who have families living in those cities, and they were really frustrated.
They're worried because there is nowhere to go, or what were they sharing with you?
Well, most of those people have already been residing in Turkey for such a long time. I mean, it's been more than 10 years that the civil war in Syria started. For instance, one of my friends, who is also a journalist now, lives in another European country. He just advised his parents to stay at home, not to get in any oral dispute with anyone, and to be quiet, because everything can change in a minute.
Yeah. So you mentioned the civil war, which is what brought the influx of Syrians into Turkey. There are around 3.2 million Syrian refugees living in Turkey right now. And when the civil war in Syria first broke out in 2011, Turkey welcomed them with open arms.
Turkey has promised it will not turn away Syrian refugees fleeing unrest in their country. Prime Minister Erdogan called on Damascus to show what he calls more tolerance towards its citizens.
Please, don't give any credit to those who are trying to expel Syrian refugees from here. You should keep in mind that they are brothers and sisters.
What has changed since then? Why are we seeing this kind of anger towards the Syrian refugee population?
Well, Malika, to be honest, this war wasn't supposed to last this long from the Turkish authorities' perspective. I remember they told Turkish people that nearly 150,000 Syrian people would be coming to Turkey. And then that number increased and increased.
Government tanks push toward the border with Turkey, forcing more refugees to flee. Thousands right now are being jammed in a tent city set up just across the border, as you can see. Meanwhile,
given the expectation that the war would end soon, the Syrian people who took refuge in Turkey, the ones who are officially registered while crossing the border, they are legally entitled to a status called temporary protection status. And the ruling AK Party government introduced that status to the Turkish nation as saying that these Syrian people are here as guests. They are not refugees. When the war is over, they're going to go back to their countries. But now, since there are other wars all around the world, including Ukraine, in Asia, and just right at our doorstep in Gaza, Turkish people realize that the war in Syria is not ending. Even if it ends, these people will not go. And given the declining economic situation in Turkey and the very high inflation rates and the loss of popularity of the ruling AK Party that has been ruling the country for more than 2 decades, people started to turn their face to the Syrian refugees, accusing them for what's going on in Turkey.
Most of them are now begging on the streets. It affects our businesses. Thefts could be on the rise. How could these people survive without help?
The reactions are more visible right now. And the opposition parties have also filled this up during the previous general elections and local elections, trying to push the ruling AK Party government to the corner because they claim that the Syrian refugees have become a burden.
As proposed by our Victory Party, we will ensure the security of the returning Syrians in Syria in accordance with the international law and human rights within a year. And this will lift a great burden on the Turkish economy as well.
When I speak to some business owners, they are saying that the Syrian refugees, even some Afghan refugees and Pakistani refugees who are illegally working, they are working much better than the Turkish people. So there are so many domestic dynamics, national dynamics that are also fueling this anti-refugee sentiment.
Working better as in they work longer hours for perhaps lower pay?
Definitely. They are working unregistered, so they are not in the national social security system. This is one thing. For the bosses who are trying to exploit this is something good for them. They employ people like refugees who are ready to work underpaid and for longer hours.
After the break, how this spate of violence against Syrian refugees in Turkey has been received in Syria. Tensions between Syrian refugees and Turkish citizens have gone up and down over the years.
Polls show anti-migration sentiment is on the rise. A violent flare-up occurred in a suburb of Ankara in August when Syrian shops and homes were attacked after the death of a Turkish young man.
What's new about these tensions is that the response has now spread outside of Turkey to opposition-held areas in northwestern Syria, including areas controlled by Turkish-backed forces.
the Syrian people living in the Turkish-backed opposition-held areas and also in Idlib, they were frustrated, they were upset, and they didn't like the way how their Syrian fellows living in Turkey were treated by their Turkish neighbors or brothers.
The natural human, when you see their brother exposed to those people, as a reaction, they may do a lot of stupid things.
Ahmed al-Hassan is a humanitarian activist in Syria's Idlib.
I see a lot of people here in northwest Syria who tries to, you can say, broke the cars, the vehicles, hit some Turkish employees here in northwest Syria and kick them out.
Last week, in retaliation to the violence in Turkey, hundreds of protesters, some armed, attacked Turkish trucks and a military base in opposition-held areas in Syria.
Syrian protesters used rocks to smash windows at this Turkish outpost. A few dozen managed to get into the military base located west of Aleppo. They were among hundreds of Syrians who protested in areas of the country under Turkish control, angered by attacks on Syrians in Turkey in recent days.
Ahmed doesn't agree with the way some protesters have responded to the attacks on refugees in Turkey. But like many others in northwestern Syria, he was watching the situation unfold. And he was worried for his own family members in Turkey.
They have faced a lot of fear. The situation is horrible, and I can't describe, especially my situation, because I have a brother there in Turkey, in Istanbul. I was talking to him yesterday, and he told me that he goes to work and back to the home. So I told him, stay in one place and don't go and back to your work. So stay in your work or stay in your house. I'm afraid of some of those racists may hit him, may kill him. That's my fear.
So, Sinem, we saw reports that Turkish soldiers were confronted in northern Syria as well as part of this anger that was rising. And the protests and the attacks on Turkish military bases in northwestern Syria were in solidarity with Syrians living in Turkey. But they also came just days after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he wants to normalize ties with the government of Syria's Bashar al-Assad. So what would that mean? And why is he trying to normalize relations now?
Last week, we heard Bashar al-Assad saying that he's open to all kinds of initiatives that would help normalization. And just a day after that, President Erdogan said he is ready to normalize relations. And he said the relations could even be as it used to.
There is no reason why diplomatic relations should not be restored. We will act together in developing these relations with Syria in the same way as we did in the past.
So I believe hearing President Erdogan saying those sentences really created a discomfort among the Syrian opposition because they have been fighting their own government. And this might have made them feel Turkey would leave them to Bashar al-Assad's hand, as the government has also been saying that it will encourage voluntary returns of Syrian people back to Syria when it's safe. But of course, I have to underline that when the government says they are encouraging voluntary returns, they are actually talking about the Syrians who are illegally residing in Turkey.
Ah, interesting.
It's not about 3.2 million. Of course, when the illegal Syrian refugees are sent back to Syria, I'm sure they would like other Syrians to go back. But of course, for the people who have been living in Turkey for at least 10 years, who have established a life, business, whose children don't even speak Arabic because they have been going to school here, this is not something hopeful. And for the Syrians living on the other side of the border in the opposition-held areas, this is kind of a disappointment. What made them take to the streets was the incidents that happened in Kayseri. fueled with Erdogan's and Bashar Assad's statement that they are willing to normalize.
Finally, Sinem, this sounds like a pretty volatile situation with a lot of anger towards the Syrian refugee population in Turkey and a lot of anger towards Turkey among displaced Syrians in northwestern Syria. What do you think needs to happen to prevent things from escalating even further? And what do the people you talk to say needs to happen?
Malika, I have traveled to that part of Syria very often, and I have seen all those camps. I have seen those cities controlled by the opposition, and I have been to Idlib many times. Yes, people are trying to survive. The Syrians are definitely survivors. But there are so many things that people need because, as we have said, the war has taken longer than it was supposed to. And people have been living in tents or meaningless brick houses for at least 10 years. These people need hygiene, these people need clean water, these people need medicine, schools, and everything. And the international aid has been cut after the war in Ukraine started. And the international NGOs are not paying that much attention to Syria right now. And we have been hearing for a long time, we have been hearing that Syrians living in the opposition-held areas, some of them are not happy with the decisions made by the interim government, the local administrations, and they have some issues with the citizenship participation. So these people who have been out of the war and who have been uprooted for several times, they need stability. And there is no money flowing there. So these people need investments to have a better kind of living, because when people are hungry, they will do everything.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Tamara Khandaker, Chloe K. Lee, and Sonia Bhagat, with Duha Mossad, Amy Walters, Veronique Ishaya, Mohammed Zain Shafi Khan, David Enders, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. The Take production team is Amy Walters, Ashish Malhotra, Catherine Nouhan, Chloe K. Lee, David Enders, Duha Mossad, Khalid Sultan, Manahil Navid, Marcos Bartolome, Veronique Ishaya, Mohammed Zain Shafi Khan, Noor Wazwaz, el-Khalili, Sonia Bhagat, and Tamara Khandaker. I'm your host, Malika Bilal. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Nay Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.